There are many reasons that Dragon Age Origins is one of the best fantasy RPGs ever made, but there might not be one more critical to its lasting success than its incredible opening section. The early hours of Origins features a prologue that allows the player to immerse themselves in the world of Thedas at a micro level, followed by a first act that thrusts them into a high-stakes conflict that forces them to care about the setting at a macro level. It was a bold decision on BioWare's part to essentially expect the player to be willing to engage with not one, but two introductory segments, but it absolutely paid off, and one of the key elements that makes this gamble work is Duncan, who serves as the connective tissue between the prologue and the first act. As far as video game mentors go, Duncan is in a class of his own, bridging the gap between the Hero of Fereldan's self-contained backstory and their dark fantasy baptism at Ostagar. And though he falls on the field against the Darkspawn, his death provides the player with all the motivation they need to care about Thedas at large, and gather an army to stop the Fifth Blight. How the player first encounters Duncan is unique to every Origin. In the Human Noble Origin, he shows up right at the beginning, while in others, like the Mage and Dwarf Noble, he appears roughly halfway through. Regardless of when he shows up, one of the common threads, generally speaking, is that the player is given the opportunity to ask him just about anything they'd want about what it's like to be a Grey Warden long before they ever join the organization. The specifics differ depending on the backstory. For example, the Mage and Duncan can have a conversation about the motivations behind the use of blood magic that is among the most nuanced in the franchise, in which he acknowledges that some mages who use it are likely driven to do so because of the system created by the Chantry, and indicates that he'd look the other way if a Grey Warden used the forbidden discipline. Because as Duncan sees it, fighting the Darkspawn is more important than anything else, and if blood magic gives the Grey Wardens an edge, then so be it. Much has been written about the way Dragon Age moved away from its dark fantasy roots as the series went on, but not enough has been said about how discussions like this went along with it. And if you ask me, the absence of complex morality in the later titles is far more disappointing than the departure of dark fantasy. Duncan's ability to have a conversation like this, a conversation grounded firmly in the harsh realities of the player's individual backstory, isn't singular to the Mage Origin. It happens everywhere. No matter what Origin you play, Duncan just gets it. He might pretend to take a neutral stance on political matters as befits his order, but when the time is right, he'll get very political. We'll talk about how he does this at the end of half of the Origins in a moment, but in several of them, he'll show his understanding in other ways too. It's Duncan who gives a male city elf a sword, an illegal item in the alienage, which allows him to rescue his betrothed, and when the dwarf commoner joins the Wardens, Duncan will give them an Iducan mace, because he knows they haven't been as fortunate as the other recruits. The dwarf commoner is casteless, bereft of any rights or privileges in dwarven society, while the Iducans are both Orzammar's ruling house and the family of the dwarf noble. So by giving the dwarf commoner a mace that once belonged to House Iducan, Duncan is suggesting that their low birth need not define them, and that in the Grey Wardens they can rise to the highest of heights. Another common thread with Duncan's involvement in the Origins is how each of them ends, with Duncan rescuing the future Hero of Fereldan from an unfortunate fate by recruiting them into the ranks of the Grey Wardens. In 3 of these Origins, the political theme I mentioned earlier continues. For the Mage, City Elf, and Dwarf Commoner, Duncan saves them from oppressive social structures that they ran into trouble trying to fight against. All 3 might have ended up dead, or worse if he wasn't there to intervene, again reinforcing his political instincts. You could argue that it was his need for a recruit alone that prompted him to act this way, but based on those small actions I mentioned earlier, the ones he undertakes that don't have anything to do with recruitment itself, I'm inclined to think that his willingness to be a political actor when the time is right is a key part of his character. Despite his organization's neutrality, he uses the power he has to remedy the injustices he sees in the world. From the 2 nobles, Duncan rescues them from certain death. The human noble to soldiers led by Arl Howe, and the dwarf noble to Darkspawn in the Deep Roads. It's not political in the same way his actions in the previously mentioned Origins are, but make no mistake, it is political. By recruiting the human noble, the last son of a house that's being put to the sword, Duncan is getting himself mixed up in the opening salvos of the Fereldan Civil War. The dwarf noble was condemned to die for fratricide, a situation that will factor into the dwarven interregnum. As for the Dalish elf, their situation is a bit different. They were stricken with the Blight, doomed to go mad from it eventually. It doesn't make Duncan's actions any less altruistic, but it is less political. All of this is to say that in every origin, Duncan rescues the Hero of Fereldan from not only a dangerous situation, but in many cases a dangerous political situation, and in doing so sticks his neck out for them by a significant margin. The Grey Wardens might take in people of all backgrounds and walks of life, and they might have the right of conscription, but their recruitment tactics are not without consequence, and in just about every one of these backstories, Duncan is inviting some level of trouble onto his order, which hasn't been back in Fereldan all that long to begin with. Aside from the obvious, it endears Duncan to the player, and as a result, even though we only spend a short time with him, it's easy to view him as a mentor. But honestly, he's more than that. He's more like a teacher who broke up a fight between you and a schoolyard bully, and while no one was looking, said, "Hey kid, nice headlock. Ever thought about trying out for the wrestling team?" and then set you on the path to an NCAA title. But unfortunately, given what happens next, that's all Duncan has the time to do. Set the Hero of Fereldan on the path to greatness. With your chosen origin over, Duncan and the Hero of Fereldan journey to the Tevinter ruin of Ostagar, where Kaelin, King of Fereldan, has marshaled his forces in an attempt to stop the Blight. The contrast between Duncan and Kaelin is fantastic, especially in light of everything we discussed earlier about the former's political awareness. Just like Duncan gets politics, he gets how dire the situation with the Darkspawn is. They're massing in huge numbers. There are only a few Grey Wardens in Fereldan because they were banished from the country a few generations ago, and to make matters worse, there's an archdemon lurking out there somewhere. Kaelin, on the other hand, is so out of touch about the Blight that he feels almost like a character who's been plucked from another fantasy property, from a universe where things are far more hopeful. The Return to Ostagar DLC adds depth to his character, but there's no way around the fact that publicly, he's excited to fight the Darkspawn. He talks about how thrilled he is at the prospect of riding into battle alongside the fabled Grey Wardens against a tainted god. His bravado, as revealed by the aforementioned extra content, hides a dark truth, but it's the sort of thing the player will never understand unless they take the time to look for it. Thus, at this point in the game, Kaelin seems like a big fucking idiot who's treating the Blight with all the seriousness of a pickup football game. Duncan, of course, isn't having it. He seems to respect Kaelin, but you can tell how fed up he is with the king's delusions of grandeur. But rather than outright question him or try to talk him into taking a different path, Duncan's political instincts again kick in. Duncan's not dumb. He knows better than to tell a king he's wrong. He knows he'd sound like some batshit crazy warden on the verge of his calling if he asked him to change his plans based on his intuition alone, so he counts on the military experience of General Loghain to make up the difference. From there, Duncan sends the Hero of Fereldan off to meet with Alistair. Kaelin's lovable bastard brother will be getting his own video at some point down the line, but he really is, in so many ways, the ideal assistant for Duncan at this point in time. If the player's origin helps them relate to the plot on a micro level, and Ostagar brings them into the world of Thedas at a macro level, the opposite happens here with Duncan and Alistair and the Grey Wardens. The former teaches you the big, idealistic principles of being a valiant defender against the Darkspawn, while Alistair shows the player what it's like to be a part of the Order on the ground level. He's funny, down to earth, and rarely takes anything seriously. At Duncan's behest, the Hero of Fereldan, Alistair, and the other recruits head off into the swamps in search of a chest of Grey Warden treaties, documents they'll need to secure alliances with other factions down the line. But as far as Duncan is concerned, the actual mission itself is less interesting than how he responds to it. You can bring up that the treaties were taken by some swamp witches, by Morrigan and her notorious mother Flemeth, but he really doesn't care. You got the documents, and that's all that matters to him. So long as you bring the Wardens closer to defeating the Darkspawn, he's not going to judge you for whatever you do. This echoes what we saw from Duncan in the 6 Origins. No matter what the player has done, right or wrong, he doesn't judge. The Dwarf Noble can straight up plot to murder their brother. The Mage can narc on Jowin, and yet, Duncan will gladly accept them into the Order. The combination of these two things, Duncan's willingness to welcome the future Hero of Fereldan into the Wardens despite their sins, and his focus on just getting the job done, signals to the player that they can feel free to take the same approach in the wider world of Dragon Age Origins. This is really important. Origins gives the player a significant amount of moral freedom. There's no morality system like in Mass Effect that rewards adherence to the path of the Paragon or the road of the Renegade. The only thing the Hero of Fereldan answers to is their own conscience, and maybe the approval of their companions, if it matters to them. The Hero of Fereldan can do some pretty terrible things on the path to defeating the Archdemon, and by presenting Duncan as a character for whom the ends justify the means, the developers are giving the player permission and a role-playing justification to do those terrible things. Whether it's his willingness to be a political actor or his belief that the ends justify the means, Duncan is a very versatile character who can set the player down many different paths in this choice-based game. With the documents in hand, Duncan and Alistair commence with the Joining, the ritual that turns recruits into full-fledged Grey Wardens. The first recruit to go, Davith, dies from the taint, and the second, Jory, attempts to back out, at which point Duncan coldly, almost ritualistically, kills him. He then hands the Joining chalice to the player, telling them that there's no path forward but to drink from the tainted blood. It's a harrowing scene, especially when you consider the direction the franchise went in terms of tone and style in the years that followed. I plan on making a whole bunch of these videos, so I'll lay my cards on the table now and say that you won't hear me bash Veilguard. It is by far my least favorite Dragon Age game, but I enjoyed my time with it. Nonetheless, I do have to say that Duncan's actions here would feel completely out of place in Veilguard, and probably in Inquisition too if we're being honest. It's unclear if this is how all Grey Warden recruiters deal with defectors, but I can only assume that it is, at least as of the Origins era. Either way, it speaks to Duncan's absolute commitment to his order. If his recruits are unwilling to fully devote themselves to the cause the same way he is, then they've wasted his time and spat on the legacy of all Grey Wardens who came before him. Sadly for the Hero of Fereldan, no matter how they ended up feeling about the Joining itself, the post-ritual debriefing is the last time they'll ever see Duncan alive. While Duncan heads to the front lines to fight alongside King Cailan, Alistair and the Hero of Fereldan are sent to light the beacon at the top of the Tower of Vishal. It's far from a glamorous role, but it is an important one. The beacon is the signal Loghain will be looking for to know it's time to send in his men, the second half of the Fereldan army. Alistair protests. He resents being sent off on a side quest and kept out of the fighting. The Hero of Fereldan can protest too, and on a recent playthrough, I noticed that a dwarf noble can even compare it to the last time they were sent away from Darkspawn to do a side quest, a task that eventually led to their exile. But Duncan holds his ground. Later, we'll learn that this has just as much to do with the importance of the job itself as it does Alistair's status as King Cailan's bastard brother, and thus the true heir to the Fereldan throne. In doing so, Duncan flexes his political muscles for a final time. Again, Return to Ostagar establishes that even Cailan knew he wasn't going to win this battle, so Duncan likely knew that these were his final moments as well. And as his last act as Warden Commander of Fereldan, he ensures the future of the nation, the Theranin bloodline, and the potential that humans, elves, and dwarves will come together to stop the Fifth Blight. That last part is where the Hero of Fereldan comes in. Because if Duncan was wise to everything else I've mentioned, then I have no doubt that he is fully aware of Alistair's shortcomings and knows all too well that while he might be a suitable figurehead king, as Cailan himself was, he's in no way a leader. But the Hero of Fereldan might be. Duncan believed in the Hero of Fereldan when he rescued them in their origin story, and moments before his death to Darkspawn and Loghain's betrayal, he puts all his faith in them to carry on the mission of the Grey Wardens forward, and ensure that there is an army to fight back against Erthemiel's horde. Duncan may die here, but his presence lingers over the game, even aside from the way he ensures the strategic future of his order. Because just as importantly, he provides the inspiration for the Hero of Fereldan, and by extension, the player, to see this long and arduous journey to the bitter end. It is difficult to get an audience to care about a fantasy world itself. That's a big and broad task, one that usually takes multiple installments and years of powerful world building to accomplish. But people care about people. It's in our very nature, and when we see someone who rescued and believed in our virtual avatar die like this, butchered by nameless darkspawn as an opportunistic general leaves his king to die, it produces a windfall of emotions, rage, sorrow, and a profound desire for vengeance. To see Duncan's good work completed, to see the Fifth Blight defeated before it truly begins, and to reward his faith in us. It's these feelings that propel the player forward, to Redcliffe, to the Brycilian Forest, to Haven, to Orzammar, and all the way to burning Denerim, to the top of Fort Draken, to shout our fallen mentor's name to the heavens as the Archdemon dies. And that's what makes Duncan so important to Dragon Age Origins. Thanks for watching. Massive thanks to James McGonigal, who allowed me to use his covers from the Dragon Age soundtrack for this video. To check out all of his amazing music, just follow the links down below in the description box. Big shout out to all my Silver and Gold tier YouTube channel members and Patreon subscribers, including James Pruitt, Gustavo Balabi, Little Caesar, Reed, Pathonian, Anna Novikova, Lara Parenti, Sean Bobby, Bogu, Trace de Asada, Vixel, Dorlaxon, and Junisov, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. See you guys next time, and go birds!